Welcome everybody to last minute esports equipment ads for the 2025-26 school year. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. Number one, captions are on and auto-generated, so hopefully that is working for you. We're trying to make things a little bit more accessible. I know on the YouTube videos that go up afterwards when we post the recordings, it's usually pretty good about auto-generating captions, but trying to get that in here for the live viewers as well. The chat and the Q&A function should both be up and working. If you guys have any questions at all today, feel free to shoot a note there. I've got them up on my other screen, and we'll be able to kind of go through those as they come in. Want to keep this as conversational as we need to. Want to make sure that you guys are taking away what you need from the presentation today. Last thing I mentioned, we do post the recordings of these webinars on our YouTube page. If you search Bytespeed Minnesota or Bytespeed MN on YouTube, you should be able to pull up a playlist on our page of all of our past webinars, esports included in with everything else that we do. And you'll be able to watch those recordings. We'll also send an email out when we're done today with the recording to anybody who registered, whether you were able to join in person or not. So I think that's enough with kind of the announcements and everything, so we can get started here. My name is Josh Knudsen. I am the Gravity Gaming Solutions Director here at Bytespeed. In a previous life, I was the University of Jamestown's first head coach and program director of esports. I did that for 3.5 years from 2019 to 2016 to 2019, excuse me. Was actually a Bytespeed customer during that time, so I've kind of seen it on both sides of the house, which is cool. But we built one of the first 20 varsity collegiate programs in the country. And back then there wasn't really a rule book. There wasn't really a kind of a how-to. So we've come a long way in the almost 10 years since then. And hopefully part of today we'll be answering some questions on what do I need to get started? What are things that I should be looking out for? Back then we didn't have that information. So it's cool to see where we're at now in 2025. Couple other things on my background. I served on the NACAD advisory board for 6 years. That's the National Association of Collegiate Esports Coaches and Directors. Actually, it's not just a collegiate organization. It's for K-12 and colleges across the US and Canada. Kind of like the Coaches Association for basketball or football. This is that answer for esports. They have a ton of great PD resources listed on their website. They have coaching clinics, regional and national throughout the year. And it's a super great group to get involved with if you're just kind of starting out in your esports journey. The other thing that I'm really proud of in kind of the day-to-day or not so much day-to-day, but in the present time is I serve on the advisory board for Marshalltown Community College down in Iowa. It's a 2-year junior college that is doing some really cool things with esports in the classroom as well as the competitive side of things. And we meet a couple times a semester to kind of help steer that program, get some updates, offer insights on kind of what's happening in the industry. And I'm really thankful to be a part of that group. So it's enough about me. We're here to talk about esports and things that you can maybe add last minute here before the fall season starts. And I've kind of broken things down into 5 different categories. Obviously, the big one is devices, right? Esports is a digital sport. We need something to be able to play on. And those devices come in a number of shapes and sizes nowadays, as opposed to 5-10 years ago when the options were a little bit more limited. There's also a ton of accessories that go along with those devices, the infrastructure to be able to play and keep our students safe. And then fun stuff like, furniture and the security aspect of it are kind of the last categories that we'll talk about today. And like I said, if there's ever any questions that you have as we kind of roll through the list, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A to ask those questions, and we can dive a little deeper if you'd like. So let's talk about devices here to start. Like I said, kind of 5-10 years ago, especially when I was starting the program at Jamestown, PCs were kind of king of the hill, and that was really the only platform that was really taken seriously back then. Most traditional esports titles are played on PCs. And that's definitely the largest library available, would be PC-based gaming titles. However, the technology has come a long way, and now we're talking about handhelds and consoles, and even gaming laptops have taken huge steps over the last few years to come to a point where it's definitely a viable option if you don't have that kind of like permanent home in your school for your program. So when I talk about a PC and just kind of going through like a configuration list, and if you're in the IT world, or you've kind of gone through a purchasing cycle of esports devices before, you're probably familiar with what a spec sheet looks like, or you've seen a big list of parts, and it can be a little overwhelming if you don't have that technical knowledge. Um, so there's a really smart engineer here at Bytespeed that kind of came up with the analogy that like the parts of a PC are like people working in an office building. It starts with the central processing unit, that CPU, all the way down to your operating system, company rules, and kind of like guidelines to follow. So we'll kind of go and buzz through each one, talk about kind of what the current options are, what to look out for when you're comparing things, which I think is super relevant. And we'll kind of breeze through this and then continue on. So uh, for a really long time, Rocket League was one of the kind of gaming titles out there that was kind of the be all end all for high school esports for sure. It was the most popular title. It's kind of the um, starter game that most programs will kind of add. It's 3-on-3, so the barrier to entry was really low. And the technical requirements were not super difficult, right? We could have more entry level devices, could jump on, be able to boot up Rocket League, and we could play it in the school without having to fuss around too much about needing higher end specs. So that for the last 10 years has kind of held true. But now Marvel Rivals here in the last 6 months has kind of come onto the scene. And definitely needs a little bit more horsepower to run at a way that is playable, and having a good experience to do that. So we've seen a little bit of a shift with this kind of minimum requirement to run the game, and kind of a recommended spec has shifted up a little bit. And that CPU is definitely part of that shift, right? So if we go back to the office building analogy, the CPU is like the boss in the office. The person that's giving orders to the rest of the company, the rest of the computer, to be able to tell those individual components what to do, and what orders to kind of carry out. So it is a kind of a central piece of the puzzle when it comes to building out your computer. And for a long time, Rocket League said a dual core CPU with 2.5 gigahertz for a speed was kind of enough to get going, right? You can think of cores like the number of bosses in that office. If you've got more cores, you can handle doing more tasks at the same time. That's a very like layman's explanation of it, but for a long time, dual core, two cores was enough. They recommended that you had a quad core, so 4 cores, being able to kind of say, hey, core number one, you're executing this task, and core number two, you're handling, controlling a different part of the computer. Handling those multitasks was part of the recommended spec. Nowadays, we're a little bit more specific, especially with Marvel Rivals, kind of moving into something that's like actually written out and says, hey, we recommend at least an i5 on the Intel side, or a Ryzen 5 on the AMD side. So if you're not familiar with computer hardware, Intel and AMD are kind of the two big manufacturers of CPUs, at least for desktops. And we see kind of the nomenclature of how those are represented as i5 XXXXX, right? So the 6600K, sixth generation, uh, unlocked i5 was kind of the target spec for Marvel Rivals. What this means in practice is we can take these kind of like recommended components and actually compare them with a tool like Passmark. So Passmark is an online bench tool. We have kind of like an internal one here at Bytespeed. where we're running this benchmarking software to kind of compare individual components based on like what the performance needs are. So if you look back, at the Marvel Rivals, the minimum Intel option is the Core i5 6600K. So the sixth generation of i5s is kind of what they say is the minimum to get the game booted up. That's at the top of the list here with the lowest pass mark score of 6,300 some. I think for the purposes of today, the numbers here are kind of arbitrary, but it's nice to be able to have that visual representation of, okay, the i5 from 6 generations ago, or actually 8 generations ago, because we're on 14th gen and Core Ultra now. So older hardware that is kind of the bare minimum to get the game running, you need a score of 6,300. Uh, in today's hardware, if we look at like the i5 14600K, so just the same piece of hardware, but new generations on, you can think of it like the iPhone. There's a new generation every year. Kind of the same thing for processors. So the 14th generation Intel product is 38,000. So we're crushing the minimum spec just with today's updated hardware. So that's nice to kind of have that visual representation, and you can kind of see with some of the other kind of the recommended and minimum specs here that are listed. Most games will have that, on the website or on kind of the developer's page of kind of a recommended spec to run the game. And Marvel Rivals is kind of at the top of that, unless we're talking about like Call of Duty. But Marvel Rivals is kind of what's pushing the boundaries. Everything else that's been a traditional esports title kind of falls underneath that same the same kind of recommended specs. I see Carol has a question in here. Would you anticipate any new games released outside of the current ones that have a higher demand similar to Marvel Rivals? So I think like one of the things that I would tend to say is that when it comes to like a minimum spec or like what people are going to say you need to be able to run games, it's going to tend to be more on the entry level side or the mid level side because the developers of those games want as many people playing as possible. For 10 years, we kind of had this like Rocket League as the gold standard for spec, and it didn't really change too much in that time period. There were some, like when Overwatch came out, it bumped up a little bit. But generally speaking, we were really solid in kind of this like entry level band of hardware where there wasn't a need to go any higher. And that's because, Epic Games or Blizzard or Riot, they want as many people playing their game as possible. So they're not going to make a game that needs a spaceship to run it. They're going to try and figure out, well, what's the hardware that the most people have access to? That's what we're going to target as kind of like the smooth playing experience. So I think as far as like looking into my crystal ball and trying to say, where are we going to need to be in the next, 4, 5, 6+ years? I would think if you use the Marvel Rivals benchmark as kind of where your sweet spot is, you're going to be more than okay. Um, and we can even kind of see that with the graph, right? As that Core i5 6600K as the bare minimum, or even like the 10th generation i5 as kind of the recommended spec. Those are down here at 6 and 12,000 on the score, where today's hardware and anything, kind of after this is going to be well and beyond, almost 4 times as powerful as what they're kind of saying is the recommended spec. So I think as long as you're looking at modern hardware, you're going to be fine for a good long time. But these are the kind of questions that are helpful, especially if you haven't seen or haven't been exposed to this in the past. Now, if you're from an IT department and this is kind of what you do on the day to day, this is kind of like, I don't want to say common knowledge, but it's a lot more familiar for you. But I can't tell you the number of esports programs where it's been the social studies teacher that's come and said, "Hey, my superintendent said figure it out," and I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's kind of why we like to touch on this. And great question, Carol. So thank you for bringing that up. Um, so I'm gonna kind of skip over some of this stuff. Just kind of really the graphs are just iterating like today's hardware is doing above and beyond what we need it to for playing games on the CPU side of things. You can get really granular in here if you want, but generally speaking, when we're talking about better performance and up the stack as far as your scores are concerned, there is kind of a jump in price for each tier. Um, you know, today's hardware, looking at those i5s, that's kind of really the sweet spot for budget wise. And then you can kind of look i7, i9, you're going to add, a couple $100 with each jump, depending on what you're looking to do. Um, when it comes to memory, if we go back to that example of like the office building, the memory are the workers, the guys that are kind of carrying files back and forth from storage to the CPU to have the boss tell them what to do with that data and where to send it, where to bring it to. Um, and again, if we kind of use the Rocket League example, for a long time, 4 gigs was the minimum, 8 was the recommended. Now, Marvel Rivals, we're talking about 16 gigs. And I don't know if I have a slide in here. I don't. But the important thing to think about with memory is you can think about it like lanes on a highway, right? The capacity that 4, 8, 16 gigs, that's pretty easy to understand, right? Bigger number, more capacity, can do more at one time. However, there's another thing kind of when it comes to memory that you want to pay attention to, and that's something that we would call like how many channels of memory are active. Most motherboards have either 1, 2, or 4. A lot of times it's 4 channels of memory that you can put sticks into to be able to use. And you can think about those DIMM slots or those pieces where you can actually plug memory into as like lanes on a highway. If we're just using one stick of memory, we have one lane of traffic that I can send a car down. Doesn't matter how fast it's going. It doesn't matter how big that car is. Only one can fit on that lane at a time. The second we add a second stick of memory, or a second channel of memory, that opens it up to now I can have 2 cars running down the highway at the same speed. So it helps with the overall capacity and the performance of what you're doing. If you're comparing one machine against another, even if it's the same kind of capacity, like if we have 16 gigs of memory, because Marvel Rivals that's kind of what we're targeting as our amount or our capacity wise. If I've just got one stick of memory that might be a 16 gig stick, I only have one car traveling down that highway at a time. If I have 2 sticks of 8, even though they're smaller sticks of memory, I have the same capacity moving forward and I have the benefit of having that second lane of traffic open. So it's again a really kind of like a layman's term on how this operates, but look for dual channel memory if possible. Talk to your vendors about that. Make sure that you're not kind of tying one leg down when you're trying to run the race, so to speak. So 16 gigs is kind of the sweet spot for gaming. Anything more than that, there's some diminishing returns that happen. Memory is a fairly cheap upgrade to make in looking at gaming PCs. You're going to spend it to go from 16 to 32, which is the next step up, kind of doubles every step up that you go. You're looking at like a $50 to $75 upgrade to go to that 32 gigs. And that's really helpful if you're going to look at doing stuff like streaming, or if you're using your PCs in the esports lab for more than just gaming. If you're doing like CAD work or Adobe or some of the curriculum-based projects that you might be doing, having more RAM, more capacity to do things along with your CPU, those are going to be big improvements on that side of the house versus just like traditional gaming performance. So things to think about if you're kind of looking and saying, okay, hey, we're going to put these high-end machines in, but we need to do more than just play games with them. Looking at adding some more RAM, jumping up to the next processor slot, those are things that help a lot with those kind of applications. For storage, how many filing cabinets do you have in the office? That's kind of the analogy here. And this is another one of those kind of like cost-effective upgrades that we're trending, or we're seeing trend to be kind of a higher baseline than we have previously. And it really just comes down to the size of the games and what's being stored on the machines is bigger than it ever has been. Your operating system, so like, your Windows install is as big as it's ever been. Rocket League is a 20 gigabyte game, but Marvel Rivals is two and a half times that, or three times that, excuse me, as 70 gigs of storage that you need to be able to just install that game. And now look, if you're going to have Rocket League, Marvel Rivals, League of Legends, Overwatch, Valorant, the list goes on and on and on. All of a sudden, you're starting to fill up those drives pretty quickly. Um, the other thing would be, if you are doing that curriculum-based applications, do you have CAD programs stored on here? Do you have just like student projects that are stored on machines? Are you saving game film directly to that drive? Those are things to kind of think about, and why we've trended into a terabyte of storage being kind of the standard on gaming PCs nowadays. For a long time, it was 500 gigs. Now we're at a terabyte. Again, it's one of those kind of cost-effective upgrades that you can say, hey, for $50 more, we can double our storage and be at a spot where we've got enough space. No matter what we do with the computers, we can install everything that we need to and have it ready to go. On the graphics card side of things, the GPU is definitely like the biggest gaming performance piece of the puzzle. These are like your field reps that take those orders and go and execute them out in the wild. So AMD, Intel, Nvidia, all kind of big manufacturers of graphics cards nowadays, and there's tons of other brands that build out graphics cards, but they're using the architecture of those three companies. And if you look on the Rocket League is kind of that minimum example again, even the recommended spec, the 1060 for a graphics card, we're 5 or 6 generations past that now. So definitely looking at the modern equivalents, it's kind of the same story, right? Where the recommended spec for running Rocket League, score numbers being a little arbitrary, but kind of a good visual here. 10,000 on the pass mark score versus even just the modern day equivalent of a 5060. So that same piece of equipment just updated to today's parts is twice as powerful as that old hardware. So whether it's Marvel Rivals or Rocket League or any of those titles, as long as you're looking at modern day parts, you're going to be good with kind of like the options that are out there and available to you. And obviously, a 5060 is kind of where we start a lot of the gaming builds today, but you can go much higher than that depending on what you're doing, use case wise. Some of those applications, if you're going to stream or do a bunch of video editing or things like that, maybe you do want a little bit higher end graphics card to help out with the multitasking and the other things that you're trying to do. But kind of just a good example of like, hey, the recommended spec falls below where we start things out in today's world. And you can obviously go up from there if you've got the budget and the need for it. Power supplies, this is the heart of the office. It's pumping out electricity to all of the components in that PC. And just the really quick number here is you want to look for something that has an 80 plus certification for it. That means it's been third party tested. All the manufacturers kind of like send out their units to a third party that tests them under load, and then they get a score back. For a long time, bronze was kind of what we used as the de facto starting point. But it's again one of those kind of upgrades where to have a little bit better of a certification score for 20, $30 for the same unit, you can have a little bit more peace of mind by going to something like a gold certification. As far as capacity wise, 750 watt is kind of where we start everybody off at now. It's generally enough power to be able to handle today's entry level hardware. And if we go into mid to high end systems, you'll want to look at something like 1,000 watt power supply. Just has enough power and enough juice to be able to power everything, regardless of the graphics card that you choose, the amount of extra accessories that are plugged into that machine. Those are kind of like our two baselines for nowadays. And that's kind of it as far as like the overall configuration of a PC. Those numbers also apply to laptops in kind of the same vein. Would be represented a little bit differently, and we'll talk about laptops in a second. But as far as the overall configuration of a gaming PC, that's kind of what we're looking at as far as today's nomenclature is. On the accessory side, it can be a little overwhelming, right? There's monitors, keyboards, mice, headsets. The list goes on and on and on. And depending on what you're doing, you're going to need a good portion of that, or maybe all of it. If you're building out a streaming setup or something like that, where you need a webcam and a microphone. Um, Kind of a fun little exercise I like to kind of play with folks is looking at monitors because I think it's something that gets overlooked in some cases. And it has to do with the refresh rate of that panel. So refresh rate, it's often represented at like a hertz number, and that's just how fast that monitor shows or refreshes the information on screen. 60 hertz is like your basic office monitor, your business lab, or the you know the desk that your secretary or your principal uses, or your teacher desktops. Those typically have 60 hertz screens. They're kind of generally used for office use or kind of like daily computing use. Um, the refresh rate on that 60 hertz translates to new kind of refresh of that screen every 16 and a half milliseconds. When we talk about gaming rated monitors, faster refresh rate means faster information being refreshed on screen, which translates to a better gaming experience, right? You're talking about frames winning games and being able to see what's actually happening in the game at a speed that translates to good performance. 144 hertz is kind of where that starts. It's a big difference when it comes to moving from that standard office monitor or that TV to something that's actually rated for gaming. It's over twice as fast when it comes to how fast it's going to refresh the screen. So 144 hertz, that's kind of the gold standard for gaming. You can go up from there, right? 240 hertz is kind of it's becoming a little bit more of a standard in the college world where you're getting kind of like the ultra competitive programs. They want to push the envelope on what you can do with the machines. And so 240 is kind of the next step up, but it's a much smaller gain than when it comes to going from 60 to 144. You can even go higher than this. 360 is another kind of step up beyond that. And with each jump, yes, you are improving that performance, but there comes a big cost to jumping up past that 144 mark. And the diminishing returns that you get, might not be worth it, especially if you're looking at a high school program that's not, like top of the nation competitively. 144 is kind of the sweet spot where it makes sense on the dollar side and on the performance side. So you can think of a 60 hertz monitor, generally $150 gets you a really good one. You can add $50 to $100 to go to that gaming rated monitor. And then every step up past that is going to be most likely another $100. So whether it's worth it to you, I would argue most programs it's probably not. We could take that extra money and shove it into better components for the computer or more devices or more accessories. It's kind of a balancing act that you'll want to take. Consoles, like I said, nowadays the number of devices that are out there and the number of gaming titles has expanded so much since I was a coach 10 years ago. And now, Mario Kart, Super Smash Brothers, Splatoon, all three really, really popular titles in the K-12 world, and even, in the college scene, they are on a Switch, and that's the only device that they're on. It's not a computer. And so, looking to the future and kind of where that hardware sits. We're kind of in a spot where the Switch OLED, kind of the previous generation model, is kind of has been the gold standard for a number of years. And MSRPs for a fraction of what a gaming computer costs. So I think the advantage to consoles and kind of why they're so popular beyond just being able to play some of the titles that are locked to that console is it is a much more kind of budget friendly way to get into esports. And it's a great way if you're just starting a program to be able to jump in, get some students involved, but not have to, pay $1,500, $2,000 to outfit a gaming station with a PC. We could do a couple of $100 here, $350 for a Switch OLED, buying a couple extra controllers, And then you've got an esports program, believe it or not. So it's kind of a really cool entry point, and a good way to kind of dip your toe in it, for a much more budget friendly option. As of June 5th, the Switch 2 is out. It's $100 more, better hardware overall, and it eventually, I think, will be the platform that everybody needs to switch to. But for right now, it is kind of presenting some fun changes, and looking at performance differences in a game like Smash Ultimate. The online experience for Nintendo has been something in the past that has not been super great. With this new console out and kind of some of the other things that Nintendo's doing, with like their online chat function and things like that. We're hoping that the online experience gets a little bit better. And actually, the console has mouse support with the controllers now. You can actually pull those off and turn them face down, and it'll function as a mouse. There's also USB ports on the dock of both of these consoles, and could open the door for more programs to kind of jump in with those PC titles that are cross-platform, to be able to maybe try things out with a mouse, without needing to get into a PC. The list of games is going to be really small that works for, but it could kind of be like the training wheels to getting your program from just consoles to those PCs. And then we can talk about handhelds, kind of alongside, the Nintendo Switch. Another kind of like cost-effective way to get into esports without having to dive in and outfit a full lab, is looking at, Windows-based handhelds like the Lenovo Legion Go. Asus has the ROG Ally. There's a couple of other brands out there. You've maybe heard of a Steam Deck. But the Lenovo Legion Go is kind of the one that we're going to focus on today. And this is a really cool handheld form factor, just like the Switch. But the difference is, instead of a console, this is a Windows-based platform that can fit in your hands, with pretty decent specs too. Like looking at running Rocket League or even Marvel Rivals in some cases, or some of those games. Obviously, with the settings turned down a little bit, but with a dock, connected up to a 144 hertz monitor, plug a mouse and keyboard into the dock. Now all of a sudden you've got, a very entry level kind of Windows-based gaming experience. That could come in at $1,000 a piece instead of 2,000, depending on kind of what you're looking at. So we haven't had a lot of schools jump on board with this yet, but it's something that a lot of them are looking at, and we're quoting these out and pricing them out for folks now, and it does kind of like offer another kind of entry point, or kind of a go between the consoles and a full blown like esports lab with gaming PCs. So this is definitely something to watch for the future. And I personally am really excited about, the windows and doors that this will open for schools who, want to get desperately into esports, but are a little bit more, limited with the finances that they have available. Other things from Lenovo, like I said, laptop options nowadays have come so far. If you would have asked me 5, 6 years ago, about like, hey, should we try and do esports with laptops? I would have said no, run for the hills, don't do it. But we've come a long way, in a very short amount of time. The GPU equivalents that go into laptops now are really, really great. A lot of times these laptops come with that high refresh rate screen already in them. So you might have a 144 hertz screen as part of your laptop. Difference being, it might be 15, 16 inches instead of 24, but you've got a keyboard right there, you've got a screen there, you've got the PC there. All you really need is a headset and a mouse, and you're off to the races. So it is another kind of way, especially if you don't have a permanent home for your esports program. You could buy some gaming laptops and put them on like a charging cart, and be able to move them from place to place in the school, depending on where you can set up. And it's a lot more viable of an option now. And they're great for that dual use case as well. Having laptops that can go with you on field trips, or in kind of like a CAD lab, or robotics, or Adobe, or a number of applications, right? Um, you've got that kind of mobile aspect to it that gives you more flexibility at the end of the day. The one thing I will say with laptops is we still haven't kind of figured out the battery situation on how to make that last longer. These machines, because they have the graphics card inside them and they have all this extra hardware to be able to play games, means they need a lot more power. And so, your battery life might be an hour or two is all. So a lot of times you'll have when you're sitting down for like a gaming session, still wanting to be able to be plugged in, but you can go to different rooms within the school to do that. And it's a lot more viable option, like I said, than it was years ago. Then it comes to infrastructure. Like I said, this is a digital sport. We need internet to be able to play. So it's kind of some best practices, not necessarily like hardware that you would need to buy, but kind of ideas for starting up if you're trying to get into esports this fall. Looking at your networking and internet access, kind of the standard that we've seen across the country is putting those devices on a separate VLAN, a separate network, so to speak, than the rest of the school. Locking things down really hard with admin profiles so that the students aren't able to download things without a coach or a teacher or some kind of a supervisor coming over and actually giving them the login credentials or logging in for them, rather. You always want to look and try to get on a wired internet connection. Use that Ethernet port. If you've ever tried to run 30 Chromebooks off of one access point in a school, you've known the struggle that Wi-Fi can kind of give you in some cases. And we want a smooth, fast experience for students, especially if gaming is kind of what we're doing. And wired internet will definitely kind of give you a better experience overall. And then looking at an update strategy for games is a big piece of this, right? You know, the game of basketball has had roughly the same rules for what, 30 or 40 years, relatively. Esports can get new role updates every 2 weeks. Games like League of Legends patch on the same day every week, every couple of weeks. There are major content updates that happen a number of times throughout the year for all of the games. And you'll need to download those updates before you can launch the game. So if we've got a game against, I'm here in Farmington, Minnesota. If we've got a game and Farmington is playing Apple Valley at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, and we have a download patch that we have to download, or an update that we need to download. And I'm trying to do that at 3:45 when school is out and the students are showing up. That doesn't give me a lot of time to get the machines updated, get my kids logged in, get everything set and ready to go, warm up, and then be able to play our game at 4 o'clock, right? So coming up with a strategy of doing those updates in off hours or caching them with a caching appliance that can kind of help speed things up. Those are things that you'll want to think about long term, as far as like getting your esports program operating on all cylinders. That is something that basketball teams don't have to worry about, but we do with esports. Kind of a more fun example, looking at furniture. A lot of times you'll see, racing style chairs, desks with some bits and bobbles on them, streaming and shoutcasting and console storage and those type of things. There's a ton of options out there. But what I will say is, especially if you're going to go the mobile route with laptops, or if you're going to do handhelds or consoles, you're going to want a way to securely store them. Um, so looking at lockable cabinets or carts, even like lockers, that you could potentially store stuff in, excuse me. Um, uh, Make sure that there's a home for those devices, even if they are meant to be mobile and be able to be flexible in where they're set up. You don't want them to walk away, right? So having a solution in place for that is really key. And we work with the company Spectrum Industries out of Wisconsin. They're amazing to work with and have a lot of really cool options, customizable with your brand and your school colors and things, but also giving you that kind of lockable, secure option to store and move things around in a school is super important. Also, with your gaming stations, when you're setting up those PCs, having chairs that are comfortable, adjustable, give you the support that you need when you're sitting down. And we're teaching good habits to students, and posture, and sitting at a desk, not hunching over, or not having the monitor right up next to your face. Those are definitely things to think about if you've got some extra budget. ADA compliance with the desks, having something that can be a height adjustable, or that you can get a wheelchair under. Um, Esports is an awesome activity that lets us engage with students who might not be able to do traditional sports, but they could also participate, alongside their able-bodied peers. And being able to accommodate those students is super, super important. And if you're coming from a school, this is preaching to the choir, but looking at options for that are ADA compliant, they're customizable, accessible. Those are great things to look at. Shoutcasting wise, streaming and broadcasting is a huge piece of the puzzle. Like I said, it's a digital sport. We don't have like a football field that I can go to on Friday night and sit down and be able to watch the Farmington High School play their rivals, right? I need some way to watch the game. And a lot of times that's streaming through sites like Twitch or YouTube. And the back end of that, actually running those broadcasts, are students, and they're doing the streaming. And to be able to build out like a nice kind of like mobile set for them, with a desk that has the school logo on the front and some monitors so that they can watch the game film. Those are kind of like nice extras that you can add to your program. I would definitely say it's not a mandatory have to have to get started. But a lot of programs that have been around for a while, this is kind of the natural next step, is to go from, we're just playing the games to now we're streaming and producing them, having that kind of ESPN style broadcast. This is a great way to kind of add that piece to your program. And it also lets more students participate at one time. And then kind of the last thing on here, safety and security, both cybersecurity, and physical security. You want to stay in control of your assets, right? A lot of times these are expensive pieces of equipment that we're putting in a classroom or a computer lab. So thinking about who has access to those pieces of equipment is really important. We've had more schools in the last 12, 18 months that have come to us and said, hey, somebody stole our graphics card out of our computers, or walked away with a Switch controller or something like that. It's coming in more than ever, right? So looking at access control, like a digital lock on that door, or even a physical key that just a teacher has, limiting who can get in and out of that room, making sure there's always an adult in there. It's definitely something that more and more people are looking at. Also, like, maybe put a security camera in that classroom, or in the hallway, so that you can know, okay, when something walked away, we can kind of pinpoint when that happened, and be able to hopefully recover that piece of equipment. Um, and then on the cybersecurity side, you will have to open up your firewall to be able to access the games. Allowing ports to be open that, my guess is, are not generally accessible to the larger school, or the devices that you have already on campus. So you'll want to make sure that there's a plan in place, and you've got really good endpoint detection. You've got a really good cybersecurity kind of policy in place to be able to protect you with those devices that have a little bit more freedom than kind of what I would generally guess the rest of the school has. So you want to make sure that you're protected in that regard. So it's definitely something that we're starting to see more and more schools ask, hey, what are other schools doing, or do you have a solution in place, so that we can feel protected and have that peace of mind. So definitely things that we want to mention in today's climate. And then kind of last, budgetary considerations, planning. The big word this year has been tariffs. Every system integrator, every manufacturer is having to deal with them. And it continues to be kind of this flip-flop policy where, one month, this is what the price looks like. Next month, it could be completely different, depending on what is happening, at the global market and in Washington. So talk to your vendors, get a hold of your bite speed sales rep, ask them, hey, what do things look like today? If you're not going to be doing things, before the fall season kicks off, but maybe it'll be a winter or a spring purchase, start to have those conversations now, and kind of come up with a plan in place so that you're prepared and you know kind of what to expect, based on what's happening out there in the market. We've had a lot more schools talk to us about leasing stuff now for esports, as opposed to buying, kind of spreading out those payments year over year and being able to kind of leverage things a little bit differently. It's definitely not for everybody, but we have seen that become a tool being used by teams to not only keep hardware kind of fresh and updated more often, but also just like I said, making your dollars work a little bit harder for you. And then lastly, kind of this refresh cycle, long-term planning. These machines that we're looking at today, like I said, are really solid for playing the gaming titles that are relevant today. And I would expect them to be the same for 4 or 5 years, and hopefully beyond that. But stuff does slow down over time, and there are different things we're seeing right now. Great example of it: the Windows 11 changeover in October. Windows 10 support goes away, and there are some pieces of hardware out there that are still being used in schools every day that are not able to make that jump from Windows 10 to Windows 11. So they need to be cycled out, or they need to be refreshed with hardware that can make that jump, right? So planning for that long term, and looking at, are we going to refresh the entire fleet in 5 years, or are we going to do a portion of it and kind of do a year by year example? Those are conversations that it's never too early to have. And I would encourage you to do that, especially if you're just getting started. The budget might be available in 2025, but who knows what it'll look like in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So coming up with a plan and kind of having that in place is always something good to do. And those are good conversations to have with your IT department in your school, with your business office, kind of come up with a plan. That's all I got for you guys. Hopefully it was a good 45 minutes of information. Like I said, if you have questions or anything, please feel free to dump them in. I'll hang out for a couple minutes here in case you do. My contact information, all of that is on the QR code if you want to take a snap of that. I actually have my Microsoft booking link on that page that'll come up as well. So if you want to schedule a one-on-one call with me to talk about your school, you're more than willing to do that, or you're more than welcome to do that, excuse me. Along with just shooting me an email, or giving me a call to talk about what's going on with esports at your school. There's still time to get stuff in place. Depending on where you're at, the fall season for esports, a lot of time will start in September. Maybe it's October for some of the later states out there. So there's still time if you're scrambling and trying to get stuff in before seasons and practice and stuff will start. We'd love to help you if you're looking for equipment, or if you're just looking for resources and info. Happy to have those conversations with you. So thank you so much for joining us live. If you're watching the YouTube recording, leave your comments down below, and we'll try and get to those and respond back. Or like I said, feel free to shoot me an email, or book a one-on-one, and we can talk further. So thanks so much. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Really appreciate it.